Well, welcome everybody to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette. We're so glad you're with us today to stay curious. We have Terry White with us. Terry, welcome to our set
Thank you,
here.
sir. Yep.
Well, thank you. For over a year, Terry's been coming on Stay Curious once a month to talk about the space shuttle like no one else can. Because what kind of job did you have for 30 some years out there?
Well, I had a variety of jobs, but started out as a mechanic, then a supervisor, then manager and orbiter processing chief. So I had a lot of roles in my 34 years.
And he ended up being the manager of the orbital processing facilities, the OPFs, three of them built right around the VAB. And here is our wonderful reveal of Atlantis there out there. You folks that have been out there and seen this, I'll bet your skin, my arms, the hair on my arm raises every time I see this.
Yep.
Tell them why, Terry. What's on the other side of that picture?
On the other side of that picture is the orbiter Atlantis, 33 times into space.
Yep.
So it was the fourth orbiter to fly.
And it has the tail number OV-104. And we're going to look specifically at the wings of a space plane. We've got a model here. Terry's going to talk a little bit about it out there because when I see this orbiter out there, um, I'm lucky that I live here and I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. But every time I try to look at it, maybe if I have the time to pick out some detail, and the other day I was out there and I said, I want to know more about these wings. And there's one man that can tell us all the details about it. And that's you. So, Terry, but how you been? You been doing well?
Yeah, I've been doing well. So, yep.
Made a trip to Louisiana to see the grandbabies and
Yep.
all recently.
Yep.
So,
Yep. So, yeah, they're all fighting colds this week. So,
oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, as long as it's not COVID, I guess. But
Nope.
well, let's take care of a little house cleaning here. As your American Space Museum, your favorite nonprofit, has a lot going on this month. Next Thursday, what do you think about having Colonel Jack Lausma and Rusty Schweikert here?
Yeah, Jack's a great guy. Yeah, I met with him a bunch out at the Space Center when he would come back here and talk at the Visitor Center. So, real down to earth guy. So,
Yes, we've met him a couple of times. Never met Schweikert. This is our way to say hi to Marty Winkle, our co-producer and behind the Streamlabs board there. You've met Schweikert a couple of times, I believe, right, Marty?
Yeah, he was actually the second astronaut I met in 1968. He was working on LEM 3.
And tell everybody what LEM 3 was in this place in history.
That LEM 3 was the lunar module on Apollo 9.
And Rusty was the pilot of that and would put it through its paces. And the next time they flew a lunar module was went to orbit the moon.
correct.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? This is all about the DVD Searching for Skylab. Meet the movie directors and supporting cast, including technical advisor Emily Carney. Space Hipsters #1 will be here. Looking forward to seeing you, Emily, in our museum. And you can, autographs are $100. The first autograph, the second in each additional is $60. You have to be in line by 11:45. We are entertaining some mail-in autographs, and particularly for Rusty. So just going to be one of the last opportunities to see these gentlemen. Jack's 87. I think Rusty hit 90.
Okay.
Should be a fun morning here. And then that Saturday for 2 hours, we're going to have this lovely lady, an Earthling, Nicole Stott, 104 Days in Space. Should be signing her book here that I've thoroughly dog-eared and read. Love it. It's Back to Earth. I mistakenly said Return to Earth, and that's Al Warden, not Al Warden, that's Buzz Aldrin's book, but Back to Earth. Great little book here about our planet. And it really emphasizes we need to live as crewmates, Terry,
Yes.
not passengers on Earth. We need to take care of each other and respect the only border that really matters, the thin blue line.
And a lot of people don't know that she's one of the few astronauts that actually worked on the orbiter, on the space shuttle.
Nicole Stott did. Tell us
Yes,
about
before
that.
she became an astronaut. Yeah, she worked with me in orbiter processing facility #1 and that. And then eventually she went to work out in Houston and got selected to be an astronaut. But yeah, she was great to work with, day to day in the OPF. So yeah,
Putting on the bunny suit, doing tests
do
of
whatever.
hands.
Yep. But
In
so,
there. So, she's not the only person to do that.
No, K Hire was an engineer working
Okay.
with us as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
was it Joan Higginbotham?
I believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
but I didn't work with Joan that much, but I
Uh-huh.
worked with Kay.
But several
Nicole.
astronauts worked on the shuttle and then flew in it. And how cool is that? And Nicole Stott, very special friend of our museum, helps us out a lot. And we're going to interview Marty and I. We're going to talk to her husband, Chris, who's got an amazing story of his own while she's signing out there. We're going to record.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. I met him on a couple of events.
Yeah, he was one of Honeycutt's Bubbas,
Hmm.
too. We'll talk about Mr. J. Honeycutt.
And he doesn't get upset when she gives me a hug, because she gets a Terry White hug at the end of each of her flights. So.
Okay, good. But we had the ladies lined up for your hugs today, so we're gonna have to have a way to monetize that here
Okay.
next time you're on here, brother. So also got a space memorabilia show this weekend. We still got space for a few more vendor tables. If you want to pay $30 for a table and sell your wares right on A1A, just a block off Cocoa Beach. We hope to get some tourists to that, Marty and Terry. But Ken Havicott, thank you for supporting this. We have Computers for Education that Terry, if you don't know them, they put thousands of laptops in the hands of students that couldn't
Okay.
afford them in this county. The laptops coming from businesses, and of course the hard drives are removed and they're scrubbed of all that stuff.
Yeah, I used to help with that out at the Space Center on excess computers out there, and they weren't laptops, they were desktops, but I would use my truck and go pick up from various locations these desktop computers and take them to the high schools.
Well, that was a good thing to do for sure. Back there in the last century, when you had those Dell hard drives and the CRTs and all that stuff. Also, can't forget the Bid Again Auctions, Chuck Jeffrey's business that handles all of our auctions, and the Mob, Museums of Brevard, 22 wonderful museums that preserve the heritage, are all involved with this memorabilia show. So we hope to see you there. Buy Christmas gifts. Terry, you're going to stop by, I hope,
Yes.
and say hi. So if you want to get a hug, we'll be $10 a hug for Terry at the memorabilia
That's
show.
what the ladies here at the museum say. We ought to set up a hugging booth.
We
and
ought
sell
to. We
Terry
will.
White hugs.
We just might do that one day here, buddy. Set it up at our Shuttle Fest in April there. Okay. Well, and thank you, Carlton Bailey. He was out streaking again, all right, in his backyard with his head fully clothed out there. But this is what photographers call the streak shot. Everyone's different when you're a photographer, and Marty particularly. Look at the colors of white, yellow, red, and blue that really transcend on this launch. Of course, the fuel is RP1 or RP whatever, kerosene and liquid oxygen, but the atmosphere sometimes maybe mixes in a different
That's right.
way.
It changes the color. So
And we were talking off camera about rocket launches. How many is that this year?
according to what I heard, is the last night one was the 80th launch this year.
80th. And it seems like about 75 of them are at night.
Yes.
How's your dogs like them?
No, they don't. It's like thunder, and all of a sudden I have dogs sitting on each of my feet, trying to get away from the noise. So.
Yeah, that was a 12:05 launch last night. I didn't have a clue. I was asleep even before we have a nice county alarm that many of us get on your cell phone that they've activated the emergency operations channel on there.
Okay.
So you know when they're about to do one. So good shot there, CB. Thank you very much. Marty, you got a question?
Yeah, we have a question from Steve J. Terry, did you see the SRMs for Endeavor's display getting stacked up in California today?
No, I get pictures from California when they change configuration of the orbiter and that, because one of my techs is now a manager, and he's the one that goes out there and repositions the orbiter and moves it around as they need it. He was the one who actually set it up out there in California. He set up Discovery in Washington or Virginia as well. But so I did not get an update on that one, but usually he sends me pictures showing me what changes they did out there.
Thank you, Steve J. We're going to talk about his challenge for his business. Going to help us during our Galaxy of Giving in November. Tell them what you're talking about. Endeavor's being...
Yeah, Endeavor's changing configuration out there.
At
And
the
then-
California
at the
Museum in
California,
Los Angeles.
the Los Angeles Museum, and they're changing it. They installed a payload in it a while back, and then just like Atlantis here, that friend of mine went into Endeavor out there and took the water tanks out of the crew module, and to send them up to the space station was cheaper than building new tanks. And no one's using them, so they had to revalidate them. But when he was getting ready to take the tanks out of Atlantis, he asked me if I wanted to go inside with him and help pull the tanks. So it was funny because when I went inside with him, just I'm fixed to go inside the crew module, he hands me a set of wrenches and he says, "Here, I've been waiting 25 years to tell you to go to work because you've been telling me to go to work my whole career."
Who's
So,
that gentleman?
Tim, it'll come to me in just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah.
Tim.
Yeah.
So the our orbiters live on, and there were some of them have been cannibalized. The three
Yes,
that
they
are in
have. The
displays.
Smithsonian won't share, but Los Angeles and KSC share parts that can still be validated and used.
And they're on the space station right now.
And it was odd going into Atlantis because we had platforms for the horizontal, we had different platforms for the vertical, but now that it's sitting at the angle that it's sitting at now, that's what I was doing, was installing the platform so they could go in there and go to work
Mhm.
and not be trying to do all your work sitting at an odd angle. So.
Right. Yeah, getting in that, it's at an attack angle, Atlantis. You'll
yeah.
see it here in a minute. And they're putting Endeavor uniquely on its tail, like on the pad.
Yeah, it
with
will be
two
in vertical.
SRBs
Yes.
and a big ET take on there. And we can envision that when we see ours outside the Atlantis. They have the ET and two solid rocket boosters. And give credit to Delaware North. They're always painting, redoing stuff out there. They do people can be judgmental about some of the history being a little bit skewed. Not too much, I think, but they do a great job. It's part amusement and part facts. So.
And they're slow to change stuff when you point out an error.
Are they?
Yes.
Yeah, there's been astronauts called not called commanders that were commanders. I noticed that.
And they have some that have been given credit for flights that they never flew.
Yeah.
So
So anyway, if you can get out there, we're gonna show a little bit of it. But before we kick off here, thank you again, Carlton Bailey. Beautiful streak shot there. He'll be at our memorabilia show. Oh, and wanted to mention, Marty, we have a significant launch tomorrow night. A cargo dragon will be launched at 8:28.
Okay.
And off pad, I believe it's off pad 40. And they just completed putting the access arm on the new gantry they made so they can launch humans off of both pads now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a requirement to bring Starship over here. They don't want Starship to take out pad 39A and have no access to space because the gantry for the crew was
Okay.
wasted.
So they're gonna
there's one built out there, and I think they just finished the access arm.
they're gonna make it capable of launching humans from there. So.
I would think by the end of the year we'll probably see humans launched off 2 different space ports here.
Because they've only
Pads.
ever been launched off of pad A and B since the Gemini days.
Yep. So 40 will join that one day. So anyway, Terry, let's before we get cranked up here with the knowledge of our wings on the shuttle. Yesterday we talked about the logo of the worm for NASA was honored. 50 years. Its creators was honored there at the center in Washington D.C. So that begs the question. Dave Stange wants to know: is Terry White a meatball or worm guy?
Meatball. The majority of the folks out here at Kennedy Space Center were happy to go back to the meatball.
Good, yes. The worm, we talked about a Pentagon official who had something to do with this, and his mom said, well, why aren't there bars on the A's?
Yes.
And because it's supposed to be a nose cone. This was sort of the thing, and I think that went over a lot of people. I don't think nose cone translated to too many people.
And it doesn't. There's a lot of things even on the crew patches for shuttle that's little symbols that they slip in there, and if they don't tell you, most people don't realize what they are. The number of stars have a meaning in that. So yeah. So.
You got 121 on your hat there today. I see there.
Yep.
Lindsay and Kelly, the commanders or pilots on there.
Pilot and commander. Yep. So.
Yeah. Naughty Nowak was on that one in there. So, well, we're always glad to have Terry here. Let's get to the feature presentation today. I looked at these the other day. I was out there and I thought, I think this would make a good program. There is a lot of minutia and things going on with these wings, particularly with the back of them. So as we show some of these pictures, I'm going to let Terry tell us what a trained eye is looking at. First, what should we know about this picture?
Well, first let's discuss this is the first winged spacecraft to go and carry astronauts out into space. Now there is some contesting, and I gotta agree with him that there were people that went fast enough and high enough to qualify as astronauts flying SR-71, especially the X-15. Okay, and they were winged vehicles, but this is the first winged spacecraft to go to space, do its mission, and bring the crew back, and then use it over and over again. I mean, the SR-71 and the X-15 got flown multiple times, but so
there's a rib design to it that's, of course, special materials and stuff to make it as light as it can. But
and looking in between the ribs, that's really the only wasted space on this vehicle. We
really?
didn't carry anything inside the wings. A lot of commercial aircraft, military aircraft and that, carry fuel inside the wings, but we didn't. Ours was an external fuel tank. But yeah, so basically the wing was to support, the vehicle for re-entry. So,
That's interesting. This is a great model too, over $100 when you can find it on there. Well, Terry, you see white and black in different areas there. So just you can explain some of that. A little bit
and
there before
sometimes
we
it's
get to the
easier
detail.
to point out on the model, but what
Yeah.
you're looking at in the picture, you're looking at the wing surface, and this area up at the forward edge of the wing is called the wing glove. Okay.
The wing glove. Yeah,
wing-
point that up there a little bit.
Okay.
Marty might want to zoom in a little bit.
That's the wing
No,
glove
hold it
is
for
this area right here. And
You
then
got it.
this area here is known as the wing. And then at the back of each wing, we have two elevons. Okay, the elevons help hydraulically controlled, and they control the orbiter's movement, and they're especially used on re-entry. So,
Okay.
and they move independently, two on each wing, an inboard and an outboard. And then one of the other things you see that we'll discuss in a minute is all of these with the black lines in between. Those are all doors. They're called, we call them flipper doors. But as these elevons move, you still have to protect that structure between the elevon and the wing. So that's what these doors do, is protect that. So, and the wing is the only part of the orbiter that we could walk on. We had platforms to walk on the inside in that, but you couldn't walk on the payload bay doors. You couldn't walk on top of the crew module or the orbiter maneuvering systems. But the wings, with special coverings on your shoes, you could walk on the upper wing, and the majority of the upper wing is covered with, it's a Nomex felt with elastomer coating. We call it frizzy felt reusable surface insulation. Okay, it withstands temperatures up to 700 degrees, but we could physically walk on it. The wings would support our weight. You could not walk on the flipper doors, extremely fragile, but you could walk on the elevons when they were properly positioned.
You
Great.
know who built the wings?
Yeah, Grumman on Long Island, New York.
Did
Yes.
they?
Yes.
For Rockwell, huh?
Yeah, well, they,
Yeah.
well,
Subcontractor.
yeah.
Yeah, of course, the airplane company like
Yeah.
Grumman.
Yeah, but this was such a big contract, a big vehicle, that Rockwell subbed out a lot of the parts. The orbiter maneuvering pods were built in St. Louis.
Yeah. Don McDonald,
Uh,
Douglas.
no, it'll come to me in just a second. But
Oh.
and the vertical stabilizer was built in Nebraska. Payload bay doors were built in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh.
So all across the country, this orbiter was actually built in 48 of our 50 states.
That's
The
interesting.
only two that didn't participate were Alaska and Hawaii. They're not known as manufacturing states
Right.
in that. But Alaska, in the early days, we utilized them to track the orbiter until we had better tracking satellites up there. And Hawaii was one of our prime landing sites in case we had a problem on
Yeah.
orbit and had to come down somewhere other than Kennedy Space Center or California. So
Very cool. So we're going to get more into the detail there. Marty, thanks. I just want to point out one other thing. This is, these, of course, I think everyone understands they came into play like as a glider to maneuver
Correct, it is.
and turn and do the big. But how much did these ailerons and stuff come into play on the ascent to orbit?
Not much on the ascent to orbit. You saw them move for the turn when you came off of
Uh-huh.
the pad net, but they were especially
When it launches and then it
Yeah,
does
yeah,
that
yeah.
big turn, that's happening with these
Yeah, yeah.
there.
But
Oh, really? This
it's-
with the flippers and not with any. I
Oh,
thought
there were
RCS
thrusters. There's thrusters on the boosters and that, but we didn't use the thrusters on the orbiter on the ascent.
Oh,
Okay, but on re-entry, they're using the thrusters on the orbiter to control it, because when it comes back in to help dissipate all that speed, it returns to 17,300 miles an hour. In 45 minutes, you have to be slowed down to land at 200 miles an hour.
Mhm.
So it goes through a bunch of motion like this to slow it down. And you couldn't use the aero surfaces at the super high speed. So they're using the thrusters to maneuver it. Then once it got down lower, then the aero surfaces took over, the elevons and the body flap. The orbiter, you can't see one on here, but the orbiter, yeah, they didn't put it on
Oh
the
yeah,
model.
they don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
the
body,
bottom-
yeah,
oh.
yeah. So this is the only aircraft type vehicle in the world I've ever seen that had a body flap, and that was to help slow it down when it got down to the lower altitude. So, yeah.
We'll see the body flap on the real deal there. Set that over there, Terry. Great explanation there. It sets us up for looking at this in a little more detail. One thing that I noted, Marty, was the big gap in between the ailerons here. And we're going to see close-ups of those. Terry, comment about this angle here.
Okay, that's looking from the aft of the vehicle, looking at the back of the elevons and that. And he commented there is a big gap in between, but the two of them have to move independently of each other. And then there's another large gap in between the inboard
Fuselage.
elevon and the aft sidewall of the fuselage. And you can see the whole lower surface of the elevon and even the aft sidewall up there is covered with the high temperature tile. Those see up to 2,300 degrees.
That's the
So,
dark tile.
The black tile, yes. And then you can't see any white tile in this view, but if you look at pictures of like Columbia, it had white tile in some of the areas, but not on the upper wings. They put some on there for a while, but we found out that the frizzy could do just as well insulation wise. So there was a lot of things they had to learn from the first few flights about what temperatures they were seeing, and then we could downgrade some of the systems and go to something that wasn't quite as fragile as the tiles.
A close-up there. I just want to demonstrate this as to Terry talk about. You've got the ones on the left,
Yes,
and you've got the aileron going underneath it.
yes.
See,
The flipper
Right,
doors, yes.
The flipper doors.
Yeah, so as
If
it,
this
as
is a
it
flipper door and the aileron's underneath it, you can see that there.
Yeah, so
there's
as it goes up, and this is the elevon, as the elevon goes up, the flipper door will slide up with it. Then as the elevon comes back down, the flipper door comes down to keep that area all closed off. From
closed
heat.
off from the heat.
Yes.
Yeah, in other areas. So, is this a high temperature area during the plasma reentry?
On the lower surface, it is.
Mhm.
Because you have all that heat coming
Right,
across
we're
the
gonna-
bottom, and actually the vehicle gets, the tiles are 4 inches thick up at the nose, and they taper back to between the main landing gear doors. They're only 1 inch thick. Then you get back to the elevons and the body flap, and the tiles are thicker again because you start getting hotter back there on re-entry.
The butt ends here, I thought were interesting tiles,
yes,
Terry.
yeah.
Very specialized.
Very thick and very large. In the earlier days, we had some smaller tiles, and to eliminate the number of gaps in between them, we actually went to some larger tiles there. And then you can see these have design gap fillers in between them. Most of the tiles on the lower surface don't have anything in the gaps from one tile to the other. And you can see the white material in between.
the black.
Yeah,
That's
those
gap filler. Huh?
Yeah, those are high temperature gap fillers that sit in between the tiles. So
Now, folks, just think 33 times this was exposed to a reentry. All right.
about 3,000 degrees.
Yeah, for a full 8 minutes or something in the plasma of,
Yeah.
of this, when
Yes.
it breaks out of it, and no communications. And have these been replaced, Terry, many times?
Those, as black as those are, but of course, it's the lower surface that really turns them gray.
Right,
And
yeah.
that, but if you look at the tiles and you see some that are nice and pristine black, and some others that are grayer in color, the gray ones have been on for all 33
Yeah, we'll
flights.
see that at the belly here.
Yeah,
in a minute.
and the black ones, the real dark black ones, some of them have only flown one flight.
How about these flaps and so forth? Were they replaced very often?
They were never replaced.
Never replaced.
No.
Huh?
But now, on STS-2, they were doing a hydraulic operation testing the aero surfaces in the orbiter processing facilities, and they raised the elevon up and it hit a piece of structure that should have been raised, but it was left down. So it actually damaged the structure. Had to remove a bunch of tiles to repair the structure. Got the structure, the aluminum surfaces repaired before we went to the VAB, but did not get the tile replaced. And this was not my area of responsibility. In those days, I was responsible for the crew module, the forward section of the vehicle. But they said, hey, the crew down there is not getting it done, so we're sending you down there to get it done. And I said, the only way I do it is if I take my techs, because I know their capabilities, and I don't know those techs back there that good. So I took my techs down there, and we bonded tile in the VAB on the elevons, and when we got out to the pad in the weather, we finished bonding the tile out there, climbing 7 tiers of scaffolding off of the 0 level at the MLP to go glue on tiles at the pad.
Which bird was that?
That was Columbia, STS-2.
Oh, two. Yeah,
Yes,
two.
yes.
So someone probably got in trouble, but not real bad because that was early.
Yeah,
days.
yeah, and we repainted.
You don't know what you're doing.
We repainted the platform red and white, so it was a lot more visible because
go.
it was gray and it just didn't stand out
Yeah.
that much. But yes,
Lessons learned. Very good story there, Terry. Let's look underneath the belly, like Terry was talking about. And when I go out there and see it, we're going to see various pictures here. First thing that strikes your eye is some of the streaming of discoloration you see. Terry will talk about that in a minute. But here's another gap. This is that gap between
the ailerons.
Ailerons there. They also, no, I need to go this way. They also, between the fuselage.
Yes, between
And
this
the
aft
light
side wall
collar.
and that, and you can actually see a little bit of the body flap there. So
Right. And there's a good picture of the
Yes.
gap there. So I'm fascinated by, there's not much room to get those tiles in there.
in between,
Terry.
no, that's a difficult area. So we'd actually have to stagger the elevons, raise one up and lower one down, so then we could work on the surface to install
So
them.
there'd have to be a
it's
special
totally-
work order to activate that in the cabin, crew
Oh
cabin.
yes, but
or
we'd
would
have
it-
to come up with hydraulics for the whole vehicle to operate, and then we would do. And at the end of the hydraulics operation, said, well, put one up, put one down, so we can work on them. So
Very interesting. So tell us the difference again. I see some very black tiles among the edge on the bottom here, and a lot of other gray tiles. Those black ones are replaced, you say?
yes, and depending on the intensity of the blackness, some of them look a lot blacker than others. Is how many flights they flew. If I could get up close and personal, I can usually tell you how many flights on each
And
tile.
how can you tell that?
Well, we have a code as
Oh.
part of the numbering system that I can read on there and see what flight the tile
Okay.
was replaced on. I used to have a
The
book
hash
that had
marks,
all
1,
that.
2, 3, 4, 5. and
Yeah,
then-
those are all gap fillers in there in between. So that area has a lot of gap fillers on. Same thing with the body flap, where you get out in the anchorage tiles out between the landing gear and out up toward the nose. There's no design gap fillers there, but out toward the leading edge of the wing, also a lot of design gap fillers.
We're talking to Terry White. Great conversation as usual. He was a shuttle manager from 78 to 2011, into the program there. We're looking at the real space shuttle Atlantis as he's telling us about the minutia of the detail of it that I hope you're all fascinated with today. Marty, we got plenty of our regulars watching today. I talked to Chris Calley today. He's trying to figure out how to watch this on YouTube. So maybe Chris found us today. Hello to Dave Stange. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles. We got Larry Pushker is usually watching. Robert Law in Dundee, Scotland.
Okay.
Another there. We got your son watching today. Travis?
He should be on his way back from Germany today, so I don't know if he's flying or what. I communicated with him this morning, but yeah. So
I'll bet Gary Gerald's eating this up. I hope you are, Gary. He's seen Atlantis several times. Cliff Watson in Pomona, Australia. Cliff has seen Atlantis in 2017 during the solar eclipse. Bill Whiting, thank you for watching. Ace Boogie Stacks.
don't know
Is
that.
that any of your disciples?
Nope.
All right. Steve J., thank you for watching. There's Dave Stange and Cynthia Rossi, Tommy Usiak, and Carlton Bailey spending an afternoon with Terry White today. Marty, a question.
Yeah, question from Doug Forrest. Was there a reason for the serial numbers on the tiles change from yellow to white?
Actually, when Lockheed was building them, most of those they ID'd them with a yellow tint to them, and then later on, when we were manufacturing them here at KSC, we were IDing them with white. And if we had the ID that was illegible, we didn't just go out and re-ID them because we couldn't read them. But if we had to do work on them, we would go ahead and re-ID the tiles so you could tell what it was. But people always ask, well, why do you have the ID on the tiles? We could trace each individual tile all the way back to the original bag of sand that it came from.
The original bag of sand scooped off Cocoa Beach.
No, it's silica sand, and Cocoa
okay.
Beach doesn't have silica sand. But the reason people say, well, why do you want to do that? I said, well, if we have a problem with one, then we start evaluating, well, is it all the way back to that? You know, what went wrong with this tile, and does it affect, you know, another 1,000 tile that's on the ship? So yeah, so in the spacecraft world, you track everything that you do, so you have the historical build of it, so you can match it to it. And we would have a problem on one orbiter, and we'd take the other orbiters apart just to see if they had the same problem. So
Really?
yes.
Okay. I'm looking up something here I forgot to do here, but let's get Terry looking at more tiles here. Here we're at the underbelly again, and there you can really see the difference between new tile and old tile.
Yeah, on the right-hand side, you can see 3 tile down there that have been replaced, probably all 3 of them at the same time or the same flow and that, and they're nice and pristine black. And then out toward the leading edge of the wing, and back there, a lot of them are gray, so they haven't. But if you went forward, you can, on the right-hand side up there, you can see a darker one, and then you see one that's almost pristine black up front. And then out in the middle of that acreage of a bunch of gray tiles, you see that one that's nice and pristine black, so that one was replaced. Now, some of them were replaced for damage, some of them to do an inspection of the structure underneath, looking for any leaking hydraulic fluid that might have got through. We would take off tiles and evaluate underneath. And then for modification, we came out with stronger tiles, and in certain areas, like around the landing gear doors and that, we took off the tiles that were there. They were doing fine, but since we had a stronger, safer tile, then we replaced those.
And above your head there, you've talked about that. That's the leading edge there.
Yeah, the leading edge of the wing, the large gray panels are the reinforced carbon. That, just like the nose cap, does see 3,000 degrees on re-entry.
On the far right, the far left there, I mean, you see the body flap at the bottom.
Yep.
Hinged again, you got
Yes.
some stuff there. So we're all noticing these discoloration streaks, Terry. What's the trained eye telling us about
That's
those?
the outgassing. You can tell exactly by the outgassing streaks exactly how the heat flows on the vehicle. So when
as
you
it's
look,
coming in re-entry and the plasma.
when you look up on the forward section up on the crew module, it streaks at an angle up the sides, so you can tell exactly how the heat flows up there. You can see the heat flow back here, and you can see all the marks on the lower surface where the outgassing. And the outgassing is caused from the gap fillers and some of the adhesive that's on the protective felt that's between each gap. It's under the tiles, but it's between each gap. So sometimes it gets warm enough that you get outgassing from the glue, from the room temperature curing silicone adhesive.
Marty's got a question in a minute, but before I have one, what was the learning curve to understand what you were seeing in those first flights?
Yeah, that's it was all of it was
Yeah, I
a
mean, it's
learning
all
curve,
learning
you know,
curve,
including the temperatures. I mean, Columbia had all kinds of instrumentation. It had all kinds of thermocouples into the tiles and that, so we could see the different heat ranges and that. So we learned a lot from that data, but just by going out and looking at the orbiter and say, well, wait a minute, we thought the heat flowed this way, and we could tell it flowed totally different. So we had to modify our processes based
Okay. That's
on
what they
the
wanted to
actual
know, too.
flow. Yes.
Question, Marty Winkle.
You have all right, question from Gary Jarrell. Terry, how far forward on the leading edge of the wing did the reinforced carbon go?
How far on the leading edge there, Gary?
I don't know. I don't know the actual mark, but it goes all the way up to the wing glove. So it goes all the way up to here. And there's 22 panels on each wing.
Explain the wing glove again.
Yeah. The wing glove is the very front part of the wing that starts all the way up here at the crew module and comes back, and that's
Is that
tapering
built
going down.
in? That's another little section there
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
added.
Yeah, and then thicker back here, and then gets thinner. So
Good, good. Thank you, Gary, for your question there. Hope everybody's enjoying this detail. I am always learning something. The last shuttle flew 12 years ago, and yet it's fascinating to learn about it. And we all know that this technology has been adapted on Sierra's Dream Chaser, and what other technologies have used this?
all kinds of technologies from the orbiter has gone to future spacecraft. So yeah.
Another question, Terry, on Marty, on our UCAC family microphone.
From a space nerd, why are the tiles on the underside of the orbiter at an angle rather than side by side when looking at them from afar?
Great question there.
Well,
I wondered that myself.
The Russians wish they had set theirs at an angle.
Oh, really?
Because they did not. But because
On the Buran spacecraft.
yes, because of the flow of the air, we position the tiles so the majority of them get exposed to a front corner versus a front flat edge.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's less resistance in that corner than it is by hitting the flat edge of the tile. Especially if you lose one tile. That if you had that flat edge right there, it's like a dam, and, and it's really going to get hot.
Right.
So by setting it at an angle, if you lost one, there's less area because it's going to be at an angle instead of flat.
Now, who figured that out?
That was before my time. That was those design guys. So
There you can see
not
that-
all of them are like that, but the majority of the tile on the orbiter are all set at an angle.
That was a great question, Astro Nerd, and the idea is the heat flowing over it like this.
Yeah,
like
you don't want the
instead
heat.
of like
Yeah,
instead of
you
an
want it
angle.
coming in like that at
Yeah.
a corner versus flat on the side.
Right.
Now, if you looked at Columbia in the early days, it had white tiles up on the side walls and the payload bay doors, and then people would say, well, you have them facing forward, but yes, but on re-entry, the airflow up there is not coming straight down there. It's coming up over the wings and that, so it's coming up at an angle. So the fact that your tile is sitting this way, again, you're hitting the angle point of the tile. So
Very cool. Here's another one of our final pictures looking at the tile there. Again, the separation, the body flap, how it can move
yeah,
around.
and if you look,
Body flap's probably really important to dropping, straightening that steep angle.
oh yes, and
right?
helping you slow down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you taper that down, and it's just like putting a trim tab down on a boat and that. So, and that the body flap has the largest tile. The majority of the tile were 6x6, but the edges of the body flap that have
I
some
can see
tiles
those
that
are
are
bigger.
almost the size of a briefcase. They are
Really?
yes,
Wow.
they are larger. And even on the Elevon, we had 6-inch wide tiles, but we wanted to eliminate the gap fillers because we lost a gap filler on an Elevon on one flight on Discovery, and it burnt through the Elevon. The heat got in that gap and actually burnt through the aluminum on the Elevon. So after that, we took and took the whole row of tile off, and we replaced 2 tile with 1 larger tile.
If an Elevon was ripped off or fell off or something, would it be able to land?
Based on what I've seen from fighter aircraft in the Air Force, probably.
And the skills of our pilots.
I've seen them say, no way that airplane can continue to fly, and it did, and it made it back. Tails shot off of F-105s over North Vietnam and they come back home, and they still land, and you walk out and look, there's no way that plane could fly, but it did.
Well, that's
So,
a good analogy
Yeah,
there.
the Elevons, you possibly could. I know you could sustain some damage to it and come back, but if it totally lost the whole Elevon, I don't know.
Well, 2 Vietnam veterans here in our American Space Museum studio, Terry White and Marty Winkle, and I was in the next to the last draft for that conflict. And I know they're proud to defend. I want to say my way in November to say, we honor both of you for your service to our country here in Veterans Day
And
month.
I don't know what Marty's draft number was. I enlisted in the Air Force, but got my draft notice while I was in basic training. But my draft number was 13, so I was going one way or the other.
I'll never forget, mine was 262 out of that lottery. Marty, how'd you get involved in?
I don't have a
Marines.
draft number.
Oh, you
Yeah.
didn't have
No.
it? No, you went in before they handed out draft notices?
Yeah.
Good.
And we got a question from Marina R.
Maria R is in the Ukraine area.
Okay.
Some people say that Dream Chaser might have the same problems as Shuttle. Is there a possibility of that?
Dream Chaser compared to Shuttle and its similarities and problems.
Well, I have a little bit of a sore spot with Dream Chaser because one of our people here went to work for them, and he said, you need help with your thermal protection system. You need to get Terry White out here to give you advice. And I gave him advice over the phone, but I said, I'm not going to continue to give you advice if you're not going to pay me for it. You know, my knowledge is worth money and that. And they offered me, and I said, for what I know, you know, and everyone else I know, they said, no, you need a lot more than that. But no, they had a lot of issues when I asked them about different questions about how they were doing this and how they were doing that with their thermal protection system. They didn't have a clue, so I don't know how they're doing with their vehicles.
They don't have an external tank to contend with.
Yeah, that's right, but they still have a lot of issues with getting the tile to adhere to the vehicle. So,
Well, we're grateful that you're here today. I'll be glad to give you $5 for your time here today, Terry. since we know it's worth it. There's that too much, Marty, you think? Or...
Yeah, Terry, take it.
he doesn't give money out often.
I don't get anything.
I got to remind my sister, she owes me $1. I went down to her condo yesterday down in Fort Pierce, and we went fishing. She says, okay, $1 to the first fish. And I was like, shoop, okay, you owe me $1.
Oh, really? What was that first fish?
It was a little drum. So,
A little
yeah.
drum on there.
Yeah.
Well, we're winding down here our part of the program with Terry White here. Where I got another last picture, or two last pictures. This one really, I put a little more contrast in it. Really shows you the flow and what we're talking about. What Space Nerd said about the angles.
Yes.
And that you see the flow going towards the tip of those.
And it's hard to tell by the photographs, but the orbiter is actually curved underneath.
Oh,
it is
really?
not flat. So where you see that, as it's coming down the fuselage, it's starting to go out to the sides, curving out to the sides. And so back there on that elevon, it's not going straight back, even though the orbiter's coming in, it's going out a little bit at an angle because the vehicle is not flat. Even though people step back and say, oh, it looks flat, but you get up there, it has a curvature to it from nose to tail, and it has a curvature from center line out to the wings.
Is that the same principle of like roads being arched to keep the
yeah, and
it's sports fields
to get
and
the
stuff
heat
like
getting
that,
off of it. Yeah, you don't want to retain the heat, because if you retain the heat, the orbiter is only designed to peak heat for a very few minutes. Well, if you started heating earlier, you can't get home any faster. And I remind people, it's like baking a batch of cookies. If the recipe says 300 degrees at 12 minutes, and you don't heat it any hotter than 300 degrees, but you leave it in 20 minutes, you get burnt cookies. Same thing with the orbiter. It's only designed to peak heat for a very few minutes, so you have to, you can't have something that starts at heating earlier because you can't get home any faster. You can only come home at a certain rate. So
fascinating. One final picture of the tile there, just to show you that that's a new tile, by golly, right there. On there, and again, you see the outgassing out of the tiles there. Just so fascinating.
And no one's asked why we have painted a Cheerio on every tile.
Okay.
You see that little white circle on there?
I thought it's not a ring binder.
No.
Hole.
Nope.
Okay. What is?
Size,
I would say that's part of the device that stuck it in there.
No, has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
The tile are 94% air. So when they're manufactured, before we ever put them on the ship, we waterproof them in an oven, because otherwise, if they get rained on, they would hold water. And that water would expand on ascent and actually blow chunks out of your tile in that. Plus, you'd pick up so much weight you couldn't lift off.
Right.
You know,
right.
Columbia had almost 32,000 tile on it. So chances of all of them holding water would be. But in the early days, the original designers told us the tile's waterproofing is good for 100 flights. That's what a vehicle's built for, 100 flights. Well, in the early days, we found out that the heat of reentry was baking the waterproofing out. When we came back, we had chunks blown out of the tiles, trying to figure out what it was. It was that expanding water. So we had to come up with a method to re-waterproof the tiles without taking them off the ship. When we first started doing it, we used Scotch Guard. The same stuff you can use for your car or your house upholstery and all that. But we actually sprayed in 1-inch pads across the tile, every single tile on the ship, and we've sprayed all the way around all 4 gaps on the tile and that. But that was a very labor intensive process that wasn't envisioned by the original designers that we had to do. Eventually they came up with a special chemical that we could inject into the tile, and the tile would absorb the chemical in that, and then it would repel water. But we had to use a needle gun to make a hole in it and inject it, and then after that we could use a needleless gun, but the waterproofer had to be able to hit exactly on that hole that we'd purposely made in the tile. They thought the holes might erode, but they didn't. But that little donut shows him exactly where to put his waterproofing gun.
White little circles.
Yeah, he
every
pushes it
time.
up against there, squeezes the trigger, waits a certain length of time for the solution to go in and be absorbed into the tile, then he takes his gun and moves to the next one.
About when did that come in? I heard about the Scotch Guard.
that-
I'm thinking
that-
about all
that-
the respiratory equipment you'd have to have.
And
all
then we had to have all the respiratory equipment for this.
Oh,
This
did
was, yeah, the dimethyl ethyl silicate is a lot more hazardous than the Scotch Guard was.
So we talk about the 3 segments of the shuttle, before Challenger, the first 25,
so-
then the middle section,
yeah.
and then the last is construction.
Yeah,
So- well, when did this come about?
what came about when we were flying Columbia and Challenger.
Oh,
We already
okay.
had Challenger here, but yeah, so,
So-
and then after that, you know, there was no easy way to do it without affecting a whole lot of the other systems on the vehicle, so it was just re-waterproof, and we had to re-waterproof the blankets too.
Well,
The quilts that you see on the outside,
Yes.
yeah, we had to cover them with protective film and inject them every 6 inches on center and leave that bag on there for 24 hours, and we take it off and they'd absorb the waterproofing as well. But it took, because they see lower temperatures, it usually took 2 to 3 flights to get the waterproofing out, so we would have to purposely put water on it to see if it absorbed it or rejected it. If it absorbed it, we'd have to re-waterproof. If it rejected it, then we were good for another flight.
so much detail of our prideful shuttle fleet.
And again, another thing that the original designers never envisioned us having to do.
Really,
So
yeah.
yeah, they thought the tile went on one time and that was it for 100 flights. You never had to mess with them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They become the biggest thing of the delay and of so forth.
Yeah, because
and,
people didn't understand it, and then we found out that the process to glue them on wasn't working, so we had to take them back off of Columbia.
very good. Very interesting. We've enjoyed this with you, Terry, as usual. Another question on our UCX family microphone, Terry.
Yeah, we have 2 questions. The first one from Doug Forrest. Was the weight of waterproofing the tiles an issue?
No, it was not, because alcohol was one of the carrying agents for the DMES, and so once it went in, it evaporated and it didn't add weight at all. And it was a micro amount that you actually injected into the tile.
Can't stump him. He knows the answers. The next one, Marty.
The next question from Dano D'Amano, and I think you partially answered this one. What was that chemical?
Oh,
Dimethyl ethyl silicate, we called it DMES. In the government world, you have, you know, abbreviations, acronyms, whatever for everything, but it was D for the dimethyl ethyl silicate.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
and
dealt with,
it required, you actually had to use hardline breathing. So the guy had a full mask on and that, and he was getting air from outside of the building pumped into him through a line, and that's what he was breathing. And then he had on Tyvek suits and all that while he was doing it. So, and it closed the building, it closed the
I was just gonna
hangar
say, you closed the OPF for
to
how long?
everyone else. And so we would usually come in, you know, on a Friday night and shoot for 12 hours and that, but we wouldn't open the building until Monday morning. So you lost an entire weekend because you had to wait and come in, and safety would come in and sample the air and make sure there was no residuals. And the residuals smelled like beer.
I did, like hops and barley.
Yep.
Really, that's interesting. All right, Marty, another question?
Yeah, from Gary Jarrell. Terry, is the body flap on the Atlantis the one taken off of Challenger?
You are correct.
Wow.
Very few people knew that, and it was sad when they made me change it. But yeah, Challenger, we found an issue on Challenger where the thicker adhesive under the tiles. Remember, Challenger had been a test vehicle, shake, rattle, and roll. Okay, it wasn't supposed to fly into space, but when they decided to make it a flight vehicle, then it looked like it had been through a demolition derby. So to install the tiles on there, the skin has to be perfectly smooth. Some areas, the deviation, a dent, can't be greater than 5/1000ths of an inch. And the rest of it, it can't be greater than 19/1000ths of an inch. So we had to put a bunch of RTV, room temperature curing silicone adhesive, on the skin of the ship to make it smooth. Well, we found out that the waterproofing was damaging, actually turning back to a liquid, the glue. But it wasn't doing it on the thin. Only where we had the thicker adhesive was it making the adhesive go soft.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to remove a bunch of tile off of Challenger and all the areas ahead, and the body flap was completely covered with the thicker RTV. So at that time, Atlantis was in California being built. Their body flap was complete. So NASA determined bring Atlantis' body flap to KSC, send Challengers out there. Rockwell in California could strip the body flap and redo it, and we'll fly with that. At a later date, when both of the vehicles are there at the OPF at the same time, we'll swap the body flaps back. So we lost Challenger, so Atlantis was still flying with Challenger's body flap. And
That's very interesting. The
yep,
legacy
and then
of that.
years later, a tech comes up to me, he says, I don't understand this paperwork they gave me. And I look at it and it says, go in there, because if you look up inside the body flap, it still had the OV099 parts tag. It was, yeah, and this is, it wants me to go in there and change it to OV104. And I said, no, don't do it. So I went and argued the issue, and they said, nope, it came down from high up. They wanted identified as a 104. I said, okay. So he went in there and changed the identity. So anyone looking at after that thought it was originally Atlantis.
Well, that's very interesting. The Challenger flew back in space there after that tragedy. Terry, thank you for that information. Thank you, Gary Gerald, for being on the ball about that. And Terry, thank you for a great little program here talking about the wings. We'll do something about the upper body or something. I want to talk about the nose cone one day, because I actually knew somebody that was paid to just polish that thing day after day after day to get it the right whatever.
It takes a long time to build a piece of reinforced carbon.
Yeah, right on there.
So, Mr. Gerald, where did you come up with that information? Because usually the only people that I know that know it are ones that I talk to about it.
Well, he's a Vidalia onion farmer out there.
Yeah.
He knows things, Terry.
He does, but it's not written anywhere. So.
Oh, is it really?
No.
I don't think I've
That's
ever
why I
heard
say
about
when
that,
they
but the
came down and
Challenger
said
body flap
Yeah.
was swapped out for
There was a handful of people that
Atlantis.
remembered it, but when they came down to ID it, no one on the floor. So what the hell are they talking about? And I explained to them what happened years ago. So.
Good one, Gary Gerald. Drop us a line there if you know how you read that or knew about that.
Or did you talk to me at the visitor center?
That's a possibility there. You probably did. Well, Terry, we're going to do a couple quick happy birthdays here.
Go ahead.
Some really great astronauts. There's Rhea Seddon is 77 today. She was born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee on November 8th, 1947. And, of course, she's married to another astronaut, Hoot Gibson, who turned 77 October 30th. She's just a year older than his honey. They've been married 43 years. And I actually saw him at the Scholarship Foundation Hall of Fame
Yes.
in July. And though I didn't get to talk to him when they walked by me, I just kind of was in awe that there's two fabulous human beings, whether they're married to each other or not. They're awesome astronauts. And Hoot Gibson was said by many to be in the class of John Young as a commander and flyer of anything.
Okay.
In there, but she's married to him. There's her book. Did you know Rhea or have anything to do with her?
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, especially when they'd come back for induction in the Hall of Fame. The astronauts would come back to the OPF when we were still flying in that.
Yeah.
So I'd escort them around.
They say, Terry, my mother-in-law's over there. Go. Is that what
yeah. And then it was odd, but the astronauts coming back, all their spouses wanted to go inside the crew module. So, you know, we'd set up things so that the wives or the husbands of the astronauts could actually go in. All the astronauts said, well, can we go inside the wings? We've never been inside the wings. I said, there's not much to look at, but feel free. You can go in there a couple of times. So they'd climb up and crawl around in the wings.
You couldn't stand up in the wings,
No,
but you'd be on your hands and knees.
Yes.
Okay. Well, reascend, beautiful woman, 76 years old. Hope you're enjoying a beautiful day. 3 children, and just go for orbit. It's a book I've not read, but I might check that out at the library. Now, she was married to Hoot Gibson and Ed Gibson. There he is, Hoot, in the early days with the helmet. For before the first 25 missions, that's what they wore. But Ed Gibson's birthday is today. She's married to Hoot Gibson, and it's her birthday. And Ed Gibson is 87 years old today. Let me get. I believe he's born in Pittsburgh. I have to do this off my. Yeah, there he is, right there. Born in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York, Ed Gibson, Edward George Gibson, born November 8th, 1936. There he is before he was launched to set the then record 84 days in space as member of the third Skylab crew, called Skylab 4 by the engineers and Skylab 3 by the media, as you see there on the patch there.
Skylab was the only one that had a shower.
Yeah, there you go. And Ed's a good friend of the museum, and our godfather, Charlie Mars, who I called up today and said, your buddy Ed Gibson's turning 87 today. And Charlie Mars said he's finally caught up to me.
Yeah.
So a lot of you old timers out there in your high 80s, and we hope you stay healthy. The first scientist, he was a scientist astronaut, of course, and we're going to be celebrating Skylab 4 and his launch November 16th. With Skylab astronaut Jack Lautzma here and Rusty Schweikert. He knows all about the sun, and that we talk about the sun cycles going up. The Quiet Sun is a book that he authored in 1973, but there he is on his spacewalk. Pretty cool spacesuits, I think those Skylab guys had. Very, very athletic looking in my mind down there. He's a great writer. This is his novel called Reach. And he wrote another one called In the Wrong Hands. I've read both of them. They are very detailed in many areas, sometimes a little bit too much technical stuff. But Ed Gibson has a way of really describing space experiences in these novels. This one is about a kind of a renegade. It's more, this In the Wrong Hands reads like a James Bond spy novel.
Oh, okay.
Where there's bad guys are on the moon, creating bad people,
Okay.
and his protagonist there and hero, Joe Ribello, is out to save the day. So Ed Gibson, I like your writing, and we want to talk about that with you on Stay Curious someday. Understands he's got a third novel that he's finished up there. So Terry White, thank you for looking at the wings and helping us look at the wings in a different way there, as we look at beautiful Atlantis, just looking up there down on the thing. It's just such a beautiful display. And as you said, you were for several years, I imagine, a docent out there, something they've discontinued.
Yeah, from when they set it up until the COVID, when they shut everything down because of COVID. So
Yeah, and
every Saturday I was out there.
they restructured that in a different way. Did Gary Gerald say where he had heard that about the body flaps swapped out between Challenger and?
No, not yet.
And then, all right. Well, Gary,
Well,
thank you for watching.
Before we sign off, I need to do a shout out to,
Absolutely,
to
Terry.
Lane and Riley, Renee, and LJ. So yeah, they always watch my shows. So that's my grandkids.
Well, Grandpa did you proud today, as we learned, a lot of you learned some things about the shuttle's tile and the wings, and some great questions from you out there. That shows that people enjoy what you have to bring to us, Terry, and we're so appreciative of that.
I enjoy passing on the information.
Well, we're, you know that we are hell-bent on keeping the shuttle era alive, as it has changed all of our lives here on Earth in ways that you don't even know, and continues to do so.
Our entire space program has changed our lives here. It affects everything in everybody's life.
Yeah, better believe that. And so we will have you back in December and talk about another aspect of the wonderful shuttle era with Terry White. Marty, thank you for a great Streamlabs job there. Tomorrow we don't have any guests. We're going to talk about some of the shuttles of the month of November and about our fundraising campaign that we kicked off. And so until then, I'm Mark Marquette saying we can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.